the Senate for failing to repeal Obamacare. Alabama Congressman Mo Brooks, in fact, even suggesting Majority Leader Mitch McConnell should step down. Listen.
The people who seek leadership have an obligation to come up with plans that are workable. And to date, it's quite apparent that with respect to health care, Mitch McConnell has been an abject failure in coming up with a plan that musters the 51 votes to proceed through the Senate. At this point, if I were Mitch McConnell, I would resign and let somebody else see if they can provide the kind of leadership that is necessary.
Joining me now is another member of the Freedom Caucus, Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs. Thank you very much for coming on today.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
You know, Mitch McConnell has been the majority leader of the Senate since 2015, and that happens to be the same year in which every single Republican supported repealing Obamacare. Right. So now you fast forward 2 years, he couldn't get it done, even with a Republican president in office. So I need to ask you, do you agree with Congressman Brooks? Should he resign? Does the GOP Senate need new leadership?
Well, I'm going to leave that to the senators to decide, but I will tell you this, I'm as frustrated as anybody else in America that here we sit 7 months later after coming in, after years of promises, and even on the skinniest of skinny repeal options, we couldn't get 51 votes. I'm astonished by it, actually.
Well, the House managed to get the bill through, and so this all falls on Mitch McConnell. So, I mean, if you were a senator and your leader experienced the same failure to pass the skinny bill this week, would you want him to resign?
Well, I tell you what would make me madder than that is that we have this rule that requires 60 votes, the cloture rule, and that's what's caused us to do these off-the-wall repeals.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say. Hey, look, let's repeal that cloture rule and let's get to 51. So that the American people can actually have real representation that's not unconstitutional in the Senate.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm asking for. And I think I saw President Trump tweeted that out, but
yep.
I mean,
let's put
many
it up
of
on
us
the
have been
screen,
asked.
actually. Let's put
yeah.
this because he actually talked about changing the Senate rule that requires 60 votes on measures. And here it is. Republican Senate must get rid of 60 vote now. It is killing our party allows 8 Dems to control country. 200 bills sit in Senate. A joke. He even went on to talk about Kate's Law and many other measures that are never going to move forward, saying Republicans in the Senate will never win if they don't a 51 vote majority now. They look like fools and are just wasting time. Will this kind of pressure, do you believe, from the president on a daily basis on Twitter make a difference, do you think?
Well, I hope it will, and I hope that the American people will begin to understand, because I think this is kind of the arcane old rules of the Senate that most people just have a tough time grasping. But what they need to realize is they're not getting the representation, because if your senator is in the minority, they're discounted completely. Whereas so it means that your representation is undervalued. Yeah. So we have to push this thing forward. We have to get this, otherwise we're not going to get the agenda through. And I think President Trump's right on the money. And it's because we're doing these, trying to do these budget reconciliation things, that you get all these kind of odd bills that don't quite do what anybody wants them to do. And so so let's clean it up. Let's get rid of that rule and go forward.
And that's something that the Republicans have promised to do for 7 years. So when President Trump earlier today basically said it's a bunch of talk and Republicans need to get it done, I mean, they have promised the American people. And I mean, constituents are furious about this. And come the midterms, they're not going to bode well for all those that are seeking re-election when you've got people whose premiums are skyrocketing, some paying over $1,000 a month. And come January, it's going to go up even higher. And then, you know, you've got the Democrats and some Republicans who voted against the skinny bill, basically saying that it doesn't bring costs down. The CBO said that it's actually going to rise premiums by some 20%. Nonetheless, both stink. Because, I mean, the bottom line, we need to save people money. Healthcare needs to be affordable. Yeah, so then I guess some argue, okay, let's fix Obamacare. I mean, how do you get to fixing Obamacare when we've been talking about repealing it for 7 years?
Yeah, that is not, you know, it blows my mind. I'm a new guy there, but I tell you this, it's hard to explain common sense in a place where common sense is in short supply. I mean, when you promise repeal, you know what I think of that is. That means you're going to get rid of the laws, the rules, regulations, taxes that go with something. But when you're modifying something, good grief, you haven't delivered on the promise. And that, I think, is what is motivating Republicans nationwide to be very, very upset with Congress. And they have every justification for it. I mean, you know, we could pass 200 bills, but if they're going to sit and languish in the Senate, you know, we'd look like we're not doing anything.
I mean, how about tax reform? How about infrastructure? When are we ever going to get to that? And they're really only just hurting themselves by not getting something done. But what's so confusing this week, so, you know, we had the debate. And the vote to debate whether or not to proceed on the vote. I mean, the whole thing was so confusing. So they went ahead into the early morning hours. Eventually, they did vote to debate. So that's 20 hours of debate. And then they put forth a bill. They call it the skinny bill, which came out of nowhere. I mean, that was just invented this week. And then this vote happens at 3 o'clock in the morning. It just seems like, you know, they've had 7 months since this president took office. They've had 7 years to get their ducks in a row. They've been complaining about Obamacare since 2010. I don't understand why it's become such an issue, and you got to look at the leadership. I mean, who else is there to blame? It's sort of like, you know, when your ratings stink, well, you go to the top. I mean, somebody's got to, I hate to say it, got to get fired. It's a bad word to use when it comes to this administration these days, but it's either fired or resigned, and when it comes to Senate leadership, you have to resign.
Well, the reality is people have got to take ownership of this. That's what has to happen. You have to take ownership of the direction you're supposed to be leading in. You have to take ownership of the legislation itself. How in the world did we get here? How did we get in this odd position where you can't even get 51 senators to vote? You'd have to bring in Vice President Pence to crack the tie on just moving to proceed. And this is 7 years of promises. You know, where people have got to take accountability, and that's really what it's all about.
All right. Hopefully they can come together with some amendments, because that also, I mean, Ted Cruz trying to get through an amendment, and Mike Lee and Rand Paul. I mean, all these amendments aren't even getting through. I don't understand. I think I need to run for office. It's so frustrating.
You might.
I want to get something done. I can't stand it. It's driving me nuts. All right.
Me too. What little hair I have, I'm pulling out right now, you know, so.
Oh, my gosh. All right, Congressman Andy Biggs, thank you very much.